Hi, I'm Julie from Ware Home Studios in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and today I am going to be showing how to throw a bowl on the wheel with a lot of detail along the way. So I'm going to adjust my camera here so you can see exactly what I'm doing on the wheel. Okay, so I'm going to take a nice wedged ball of clay. It has started off relatively round. It's got some wrinkles and some little imperfections, but that should be good enough for getting started as long as the overall shape is pretty round. This way I won't trap an air bubble or anything underneath the round form, and it's just going to be easier to get centered. So I'm going to first look at the center of the wheel. There's a little dot on the center of these bats. So right now I have a bat on top of the wheel head so that I can pick up the whole bat and not touch my soft wet piece. So I'm going to hold the ball of clay in my dominant hand. For me, I'm right-handed, and I'm going to look at the center and slam that ball of clay on there. And now if it was off by more than a ½ inch, I'm going to take it off and put it on again so that I don't have to fight with the clay the whole time. You also notice that as I did that, I held onto the ball of clay all the way onto the bat. That's sort of following through with my slamming. And that way I'm more likely to hit the center is what I find. So now I'm just gonna smack the ball of clay a little bit, make sure that, if it looked a little bit lumpy on one side or the other, I can fix that. And I'm just kind of making sure it's thoroughly on the bat. With a plastic bat, if you have any water under the piece or get any water under the piece, it's going to slide right off. So I want to make sure that your bat is completely dry. So before you put the ball of clay on. Now I'm going to squeeze out some water on the piece, and I'm going to scoot my whole body fairly far forward so my legs are wrapped around the wheel, and that way I'm going to be nice and close so I can brace my elbow into my hip bone or my pelvic bone, and that way all I have to do, if everything's going well and I actually have my elbow braced, I just have to lean forward, and just that slight tilt of my pelvic bone is going to push into the clay and do a lot of the work for me without having to use a lot of muscle. And then my right hand is going to make a fist, and I'm going to touch my two hands together, and I'm going to get the wheel going relatively fast, not quite top speed, but I do want a pretty good amount of speed right now. So I'm going to lean forward if my elbow is braced and not wiggling like something like this. Even though it is pressing against my leg, this leg can still move. But my hip bone is more the center of my gravity, and I'm less likely to move around at all there. So I want contact between my hip bone and then my elbow, and then the base of my left hand. I don't want the pressure to be in the palm of my hand, and I don't want it to be here. This will undercut the clay. I want it to be somewhere in here, and it changes a little bit depending on what's happening as I'm moving the clay around. My right hand is going to touch again. I have my sponge in my right hand so I can squeeze out the water as I go. Some people will hold their hand open and maybe not have the sponge. I like to have it so I can constantly add water as I need it. So now I'm going to start to push downward into the clay. That's especially important when you first get your piece of clay on the wheel. That way it's less likely to slide off if you go downward first. And now I'm going to make the clay lower and wider as I do that. My right hand was more dominant as I bring the clay down and towards my body. So I'm pushing down and I'm sliding my right hand towards my body as I'm doing that. Now to go back up again, I make sure my left elbow is braced again. And now I'm going to lean into the clay with my left hand, and my right hand is at a slight angle facing towards my body, angled towards my body. If this hand needs to move, my right hand, it's not going off to the side. It's only coming towards my body. And that way it's still touching my left hand, and it's nice and braced overall. As soon as it gets away from the left hand, it gets wiggly. So now I'm going to lean into the clay to come up. My right hand is at that slight angle pushing inward as well. And I'm bringing the clay up into sort of a bell shape. I don't want to go super tall with the shape because sometimes you can pull that clay off the wheel completely. So I err a little bit on the lower side rather than making a tall cone. Now I'm going to come back down again, and my right hand is going to do a little more work. It's right on the top and center. And as the clay comes down, I very slowly slide my right hand towards my body, still touching my left hand there. And now I'm going to clean up the skirt of clay at the bottom. So I'm pushing into that inside corner, getting rid of that little skirt where a lot of the lumps and wobbles will hide. And now I'm going to come back up again. So now my left hand is going to do a little more work than my right, but both hands are always touching the clay as I come up. And make the bell shape, and then I'm going to come back down again. My right hand's doing more work now than my left, sliding my right hand towards my body. And now I'm going to clean up the skirt at the bottom. And as I think I'm getting closer to centered, I can check to see if I'm centered by resting my hand on the splash pan, so I have a fixed point. And I'm going in, my middle finger is the longest, so that's the one I'm going to use, and I'm bringing it up to the clay. And if it's continuously touching, it means it's centered. Sometimes you have loose clay on the surface that you want to get rid of so you get a little better read of what's going on. And if it's totally centered, it's going to continuously touch my finger. I go in perpendicular to the clay rather than off to the side. Sometimes your hand will kind of ride on that wobble and you'll think that it's centered. I'll show you that. So you might be like, oh yeah, my finger's continuously touching, but you can see it's actually moving my whole hand. And if I go in perpendicular, I can see that more obviously. It's off by maybe 1/16 of an inch or so, maybe even 1/8 inch. So I'm gonna go back to centering to fix that. So my left elbow is braced in my hip bone right now. I'm leaning into the clay, rising up a little bit. When I'm pretty close to centered, I don't go quite as high with that bell shape. And sometimes if I'm really close to centered, all I need to do is put both hands on the clay with steady, even pressure. So I'll just kind of hold steady in this position, keeping both hands equal pressure. So I'm not changing the shape at all. And then one little thing that I like to be aware of is having, like, if you have a little bowl shape in here, right now I have a slight indent. It's not bad. This is currently centered, so it's not a big deal, but sometimes the wobbles of your piece are going to hide in the center. So I want to make sure that that point is actually higher than what's around it. So I kind of push down around the outside. If I really have an exaggerated bowl shape happening, something like that, this can really be a problem area for wobbles. So to fix that, I'm going to get my right hand, still touching my left hand out here, right on that ridge. So it's the side of my right hand right here that's touching that ridge. I'm pushing it downward, and then I'm sliding my right hand towards my body. And now I'm going to really brace my left elbow and push inward with the heel of my left hand. And you can see where this is the clay is sort of worn away. This is where the actual pressure is happening. Sometimes I'll tilt my left hand slightly inward, and then sometimes I'll have a little bit more vertical. Now I'm gonna get rid of that bowl shape again. Sometimes it'll take a couple tries to get through that. And usually it's all about my right hand and the position of that. So sometimes it's forward, sometimes it's back a little more. Okay, so once I'm centered completely, then I'm going to break into the center, and basically I'm going to drill a hole with my 2 thumbs. My other 8 fingers rest at the outside, and I'm going to drill a hole straight down. I add a little bit of water as I go if I need it, but I don't want a ton of water in there because I want to see what my fingers are doing. I want to see the depth of the clay. Obviously I don't want to go all the way down to the bat and have a hole in the bottom of my bowl, so I'm going to check it before I go too far, and I want to be about 3/8 of an inch thick. This is about 1/4 inch, my needle tool, so it's a little bit thicker than that. So I'm going to poke the needle tool in. I'm going to rest my finger at the top of the clay. The needle tool is against the bat, and my index finger is at the top of the clay right now. And I'm going to pull the needle tool out, and that's marking my thickness. So that's about where I want to be. It might be hard to tell on the video, but that's about 3/8 of an inch. Now I have a little hole in the center where I just checked my thickness, so I'm going to smooth that over. And now it's important to not open up the form and widen it with your thumbs, because if you do that, generally your hands are coming apart. There's ways to avoid that, but the way that I like to do it is I stack one hand on top of the other. I usually put my left hand in first, and I scoot my body back a little bit because I need a little more space to come towards me. So now I have one point of contact. Basically, it's my middle finger of my left hand and I kind of have my fingers curled like this on the interior. So my left hand's first, my right hand is just kind of helping to back up that pressure. I'm using a little bit of forearm strength as I'm doing this. So I'm coming outward, and for a bowl, I'm gonna come out maybe like an inch or so, and then I'm gonna very gradually rise up. And the clay's getting just a little bit dry, so I'm gonna add a small amount of water. I still wanna be able to see what's going on, so I don't wanna dump a bunch of water in there. So I'm starting at the center again, kind of coming out relatively flat, and then very gradually rising up as I come out. And then as I do that, sometimes this edge will start to get a little bit sharp. And if that starts to get too sharp, it will actually tear, and it will collapse your form. So with a bowl, it's especially important to compress your rim. So I'm going to gently support the rim with my left hand. I'm at 6 o'clock on the wheel head. This is 3 o'clock over here, and this is high noon in the front. So at 6 o'clock, I'm pinching with my left hand, not really squeezing, just supporting. And then my right hand with the sponge, dry sponge or relatively dry sponge, I'm just pressing down on the rim and thickening it up. And now I'm gonna clean up some of the water in there so you can see what the interior looks like. So you can see it's got kind of a gentle curve to it. So it's sort of like circular at the bottom. I have a little bit of a nub in the center, but I'm gonna fix that here in just a second. If I can get my back on, there we go. Okay, now I'm gonna do what's called reversing the spiral. Bowls are often prone to getting an S-shaped crack at the bottom. So our clay in our studio is super smooth. Usually the smoother your clay is, or the more porcelain-like it is, the more chance of this S-shaped crack forming. So I'm going to reverse the spiral. So normally we're going from the inside out, so now we're gonna go from the outside in with our pressure. So I put 2 fingers behind the sponge, and I'm going to press down about an inch away from the center, and I'm going from right to left if I'm right-handed. So I'm pushing down, moving towards the center. It's looking like it's thinning the clay slightly as I do that, and once I cross the center, I'm going to release my pressure. And then I'm gonna do that one more time, and I'm gonna sort of bring this a little closer so you can see what I'm doing from above. So starting about an inch or so away from the center, pushing down with my 2 fingers, or at least my middle finger, crossing the center point with that pressure, and then I release my pressure. And I'm gonna do that at least twice. This time I'm doing it 3 times, just in case. And sometimes that can refine the shape at the bottom of your bowl as well. So I'm gonna go back a little bit here. Sorry for my weird videography here. Okay, now the outside of my form, I'm gonna clean up some of the clay out here. And you can see I have a slight undercut and a little double ridge here, so I'm gonna correct that as I do my first pull. So first I'm gonna take my index finger and get it behind the sponge, and I'm pushing into that inside corner, and that's forming a little bit of a bulge in through here. Now I'm gonna start to make my pulls and bring the form up. So I'm gonna add a little bit of water. I'm kind of distributing that water with the sponge. Now the sponge is fairly dry. And now I'm gonna have my left hand at a slight angle, and my index finger is kind of doing most of the work. So I don't want my hands drifting away from me over here. I want to be at between 3 and 4 o'clock on the wheel head. Now I have 3 fingers behind the sponge, and I'm going to press on that bulge into my inside hand, and I'm slowly rising up and making a slight angle at the outside and trying to continue the curve on the inside. So I don't want to push with my left hand. I'm just kind of following that curve with my left hand. And then my right hand is doing most of the work. That's where most of the pressure is happening, and this is just maintaining the shape. So now I'm gonna go back down for another undercut. So my left hand doesn't need to be on the inside when I'm doing this. And then as soon as I have that bulge formed down there, then I'm going to stack 3 fingers on top of the sponge. My fingers are kind of vertical. They end up angling under a little bit for a bowl here. So I'm gonna press in on that bulge into my inside hand, staying down there for a bit, but not pressing so hard that I make it thin and have it tear off. And now I'm going to rise up, still squeezing into my inside hand. My inside hand is maintaining that curve. Now I'm gonna add a little more water at the rim, distribute that water. And if it feels sticky or dry at all and starts to grab my hand, it can throw it off center. So I do want some water to maintain that slipperiness. But if I have the whole thing soaked the whole time with like a pool of water in the bottom, that's just softening the clay. I can't see what's going on in the bottom, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping it drier so it stays a little bit stiffer and doesn't want to flop down. So now I'm going to make another undercut and squeezing into my inside hand and rising up. So I'm thinning the clay as I come up by squeezing between my two hands. And then as I get to the rim, I ease off my pressure and gently release it. And then I'm just going to refine the interior a little bit. Sometimes it'll change as I'm doing that. And I can push slightly from the inside. And one thing that you'll notice that I did was I kept the rim relatively thick. I didn't thin it out early on. So I need to keep that relatively thick so it can stretch as I come out. If it's too thin, it's just gonna wanna tear and become unstable as I come up. So now I'm gonna compress the rim again, so I'm gently pinching at 6 o'clock on the wheel head and rounding over with the sponge, making that nice and stable. And it thickens it, makes it just stronger overall. And now I probably could make another pole, make this just a little bit thinner. I'm gonna add a little bit of water, distribute the water with the sponge. Now I'm gonna try to make a slight undercut. Can't do quite as much now because there's just not as much clay down there. And it's harder to access with my fingers now. I'm using a little bit more like the side of my index finger. Then I'm gonna switch back to my 3 fingers. And slowly come up, and I'm slowing the wheel down as I do that too. As the piece gets taller and wider, I want to go slower with the wheel, and if I get any kind of a wobble as I go, I want to make sure that I slow the wheel down to re-stabilize that wobble. And now I'm just compressing the rim again. I'm usually in the habit of trimming my rim. I'll show that on this video as well, just as a good review. But normally I wouldn't trim the rim, like this is pretty flat, but as things go wrong with your piece, you're often gonna have to trim your rim, and it's gonna make things easier later when you flip it upside down and you trim it when it's leather hard. So I'm gonna hold my needle tool just like I hold a pencil. People have different ways of gripping a pencil, but what I'm really looking for is a solid grip on the tool like this, and I wanna tilt the needle tool back so that it might be hard to tell in the video, but I'm at about a 45-degree angle as I'm cutting in. I'm level in this direction, but at a 45-degree angle this way, so that the needle tool is passing through the clay. The clay's going this way, not against the grain. If I have this pointed inward, then it's going to make a jagged edge, and it's potentially going to collapse my rim. So it's tilted back, and I have my left hand resting on the inside of the clay, inside of the clay, and my right hand is going to be cutting through. I'm just kind of gently sketching a line, holding steady. The wheel's going around many times as I'm cutting through. I'm not going to go in super quickly. And once I feel like I've gotten through, I'm going to stop the wheel. You'll see that and feel it on your hand on the other side, or your fingers. So I'm going to pull off that ring of clay, and now I'm going to compress the rim. So I'm going to gently pinch, and this is a really sharp edge right now that I just cut. So it's important to kind of pinch, squeeze that upward, round it over with my fingertips, and then I'm using the sponge right next to it to compress. So I'm pinching, making that slightly narrower, and the sponge is just kind of like making it nice and round, getting rid of any kind of double edge. Okay, now sometimes I'll have a spiral that forms in the center, just sort of on accident, but a lot of times I want it to be a little bit more exaggerated. So I'm going to show you from above here a little bit more. Oops, what I'm doing. I don't know how visible this is going to be, but basically I'm going to, if I want to put the spiral in the center more intentionally, I'm going to take my left hand and support my right hand with it, and I'm looking in there, slowing the wheel down, and I'm going to just get my middle finger right on the center, and I'm slowly coming out and gradually releasing my pressure as I get into the rest of the form, because I don't want to distort the form. And you can kind of see the spiral that I have in the bottom now. So last thing, a couple things I'm going to do if I need to. Sometimes I'll have a little excess clay at the bottom of my bowl, and I'm going to tilt that back a little bit. Okay, so if you can see there's a little skirt of clay down there. If it's smaller than 1/4 of an inch, I'm not going to cut it off. Sometimes if I just take my wooden tool and kind of make a little lip under there, I can cut underneath that with the wire pretty easily. But if I actually have more than 1/4 inch, which in this case is kind of borderline, it's not really 1/4 inch, but I want to show you the process. So I'm again going to hold the needle tool just like I hold a pencil, tilted back, the back end is tilted, and now I'm going to cut in 1/4 inch up and continue at that same angle. It's about a 45-degree angle, and then I'm pulling straight back up. Now I'm going to use the needle tool on its side and cut from underneath that ring of clay, stop the wheel, and make a little slice in there, and then hopefully pull off that excess material. That'll help my piece dry a little bit more evenly. It's less likely to crack on the bottom with excess clay down there. When you have a really thin rim and a thick bottom, it's more likely to end up with an S crack at the bottom, because the rim dries a lot faster than the bottom and starts to shrink, and it creates a certain amount of strain in the bottom of your piece that can contribute to the S crack. So now I am making the wire taut between my thumbs, wrapped around my left hand, and then my right hand holds the wooden part. Now my thumbs are super flat on the bat, wire's flat, and I'm just watching that my hands are gonna bump into the rim as I do this. And then once I get through, I'm gonna stop the wheel. At this point, I usually do that with the wheels spinning, but if you're just beginning and you make that cut, sometimes if the wheel's spinning, it can slide off and weird things happen. So err on the safe side and just do it while the wheel's stopped. And now I'm going to pull off my bat and let my piece start to dry till it's leather hard.